Hello everyone, Storm here, and today we're back with part 3 of What If Duncan was eliminated in DODGEBRAWL. This part is going to cover the events of World Tour, so if you haven't already seen the first 2 seasons, make sure you do so using the link in the description and comments section. The story has already been drastically altered in those first 2 seasons, so by season 3 it's kind of added up quite a lot. But before we dive in, if you guys want to support the channel, consider becoming a channel member for only $2.99 a month, as it definitely helps out and gets you access to awesome perks like early videos, but more on that at the end of the video. The main takeaway from the last 2 seasons that gets us here is that Duncan and Courtney never became a thing. The intro for World Tour would likely still see an early elimination for Duncan, just like the 2 previous seasons. Let me explain. You see, without Courtney begging for Duncan to sing, he might just not do it. Sure, Gwen is there, but she didn't ask Duncan to sing in canon, even when she liked him. So Chris would likely just toss Duncan out after not singing, as he said he would. And I know the singing rule wasn't followed later on, but it was obviously a key rule at the beginning of the show. Duncan quits because he doesn't sing in episode 2, so even if he doesn't get eliminated here in the first one, he still would in the following episode. He still has to listen to Gwen and Courtney argue, as both he and Gwen know that Courtney is a big competitor based on her previous outings. Both of them climbing alone isn't going to help them win, but a 3-person belay just might. And then Duncan would promptly quit the show. Of course, if he hasn't already, but as I explained earlier, he probably already has by this point. Oh yeah, and before you guys are worried about how Courtney and Gwen not working together if Duncan quit so early, and also Duncan not guiding them down would lead to the teams being formed differently, I do have a solution. Courtney and Canon already had some disdain for Gwen and only helped because of Duncan. However, in this version, she never really even talked to Gwen, I don't think. So seeing how she has no allies and doesn't really have any sort of attachment to Duncan or dislike for Gwen, she would try and form a belay with her. And yeah, they would go slower since Duncan isn't there and a 3-person belay is better, and also Duncan doesn't slam them both down to get them down quicker. But Team Amazon was the last team to form anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Oh yeah, we might also get Gwen and Courtney singing a reprise to the original song, but whatever, like I don't know what I'm supposed to do for that. So by the end of the episode, all of the teams are placed the same way as the canon show, as nothing really has changed. So at this point, this what if pretty much just becomes a game of pointing out minor details that would be altered by Duncan not being with Courtney, or our other handful of changes from the previous parts, at least until Duncan returns much later. So let's go ahead and go through some of them now. Courtney wouldn't try so hard to resist Alejandro's charms since she isn't with Duncan this time. In episode 7, Courtney wouldn't call Heather formerly bald since she never got her head shaved. In fact, Heather might not even have extensions this time and could just be all natural. In episode 10, Gwen would be the only one to get out to chase Duncan, with Courtney saying that they're gonna leave her behind if she throws this for them. They do so only for Duncan to see it's an oddly shaped stone. But she is now left stranded on the rock until the end of the episode, where she's rescued by Chris and sent to the losers' quarters. This means Gwen is the reason they lost the challenge, but luckily it's a reward. Courtney doesn't have a reason not to strip the guy in episode 13, since she doesn't have a relationship. It's possible she ends up doing it because of that, but she'd likely just delegate it to Sierra like Gwen did. By the end of the episode, they find Duncan, which doesn't matter much to Courtney, but for Gwen, this is an absolute win. The two seal the deal with a kiss, and we can now continue the what if properly. And by the length of the video, you can tell that even skipping half of the season doesn't really help, as the changes here are quite huge. To start, Duncan doesn't really care that Tyler knows about the kiss between him and Gwen, as it doesn't hurt him any. So Tyler tells Alejandro, and Al attempts to begin a bond with Duncan by asking if it's true and giving him props. Gwen and Court aren't awkward, so Duncan would likely just tell her that his team knows now, and that it doesn't really matter. However, Gwen does mention that it might be bad for him, as his team might think it's a Trent situation and vote him off for it. The song between Gwen and Duncan would be a lot more sweet, but with Gwen worried about their teams thinking they will be liabilities, especially since Gwen previously saw Duncan, or at least thought she did, and ran off to go get him, costing the team the challenge. So both of them are at risk to be voted off. I think Alejandro would still have Tyler reveal what he knows to Team Amazon, but it has different connotations this time. It doesn't really matter to Courtney specifically, it just means Cody is upset over Gwen being with Duncan and not him. And since Gwen likely isn't going to be voted off, as she never stole anyone's boyfriend, Cody would not be locked in to save her from elimination. and due to him not trying as hard, his wings would break before he snags the gold, meaning both him and Tyler failed. And since nobody actually got eliminated, I think Chris would just keep the tie and give both teams the loser class. Alejandro isn't going to make Courtney feign liking Tyler, as she has no reason to get back at Duncan. But he can start flirting more with Courtney in order to make Heather jealous, throwing both her and Courtney off her game. Team Amazon doesn't hate Gwen, and if anything, Sierra would be happy for her, finally making a ship canon. We don't get the certified banger that is boyfriend kisser, so we'd probably get a song of Heather telling Courtney that she's letting her liking of Alejandro get in the way of the game. But it's obviously a catch-22, as Heather is the one who actually likes Alejandro and is trying to convince Courtney not to get with him because she wants him. One part could have Heather mentioning that he's on the other team, referencing her talking to Lindsay about Tyler in season 1, but also serving as a segue for Gwen to chime in about how that's not the worst thing since Duncan's on the other team. And then Heather just reminds her of how well that worked out last time. Anyway, the little portal thing would be intact, as Courtney isn't trying to throw the challenge. If anything, she's more focused on winning, in order to prove Alejandro isn't getting to her. So Heather and Courtney carry it on their backs, eventually finding Sierra and Cody, just as Sierra meets the second Cody and destroys him. This causes the alien goop to go onto everyone, making Courtney and Heather drop the portal, which also destroys it. Luckily, Gwen found a box, which gives Team Amazon the win. This also means Tyler is eliminated like in canon. Courtney and Heather don't make an agreement to eliminate Gwen, as I'm sure Courtney would rather get rid of Cody, Sierra, or Heather herself. Since Alejandro is already putting in the work on Courtney, he can't really hide it, so he instead just gets in good with Duncan by saying that he took one from his book. Upon seeing him and Gwen, of course. Courtney once again isn't throwing the challenge, but I don't think her efforts matter too much for Team Amazon. Alejandro doesn't have Duncan's jealousy to work with for Courtney, but he has been flirting a little longer, so he does have her trust. Team Chris wins immunity, but the votes are a little bit different. Gwen and Courtney are still cool, and they agreed to vote off Heather before. Cody votes for Sierra, with Sierra likely voting for Gwen due to her distracting Cody. As for Heather, her vote's in the air. She might vote for Courtney since she's swooning over Alejandro, but she knows everyone on her team dislikes her, and nobody really dislikes Courtney. So Heather would still be the one going home in that scenario. She might vote for Sierra in order to win favor with Cody and get rid of the crazy girl, but Heather has been putting in more work to get Sierra's trust at this point. She doesn't start with Cody until later. Plus, Sierra has been useful a decent number of times, and while Cody has too, leaving Gwen with 2 allies in Courtney and Cody isn't going to help Heather survive the next vote. A much more viable option would be voting for Cody, but once again, Courtney and Gwen are gunning for her, so she's basically throwing her vote out of the plane with her. That leaves only Gwen, whom she could convince Sierra to vote off easily due to Cody's obsession with her. At the very least, that's a tie, assuming Cody votes off Sierra, which he does. This gives us the tiebreaker between Heather and Gwen, only for Gwen to lose, still due to her allergy. Yeah, this what if is really not making any significant alterations, sadly. Episode 17 doesn't change at all, really. Niagara Brawls has Duncan working harder to win, along with Courtney, as they don't hate each other. Duncan would likely even be flirting with her, as he tends to do with the girls. And since they won in the original episode, they'd still be here. This seals Owen's fate, which leaves Duncan without allies, so he turns to Courtney and tries to work with her. Seeing Duncan as a strong player, she agrees, due to her incredible need to get rid of Heather. When Courtney gets stuck, Duncan would agree with Al to help her out, since they're now in an alliance. However, Courtney gets blown up anyway, so they just leave her behind. Sierra wins immunity, but the votes are different this time, since Duncan doesn't hate Courtney. Duncan was thinking Alejandro was voting for Heather, but Al revealed it was Blaney, so Duncan would either join him or vote Heather or Cody. Either way, it's not a tie, as Blaney would have the most votes without another vote for Courtney. So that leaves her in the game. Due to this fact, Heather and Al aren't going to be working together yet, since Al can still use Courtney to his advantage against Heather. Courtney probably cracks her gourd first, as she's the most athletic besides Alejandro. Courtney, Duncan, and Al continue their alliance, with Al stealing the trank balls from Heather after suggesting all 4 of them work together. It's possible that after the quicksand, Courtney's shot might be able to get Zeke, but I doubt it. Since Courtney is more inclined to let the foot soldiers do her work, she wouldn't run into Heather or Sierra, leaving her fully mobile, while the others are all tranquilized. This forces her to be on the move in order to catch Zeke, claiming she'll win for the alliance. The other 4 recover, with Sierra going after Cody. Meanwhile, Courtney is catching up to Ezekiel due to her head start. Okay, now from here, Alejandro kind of holds the cards for the future. I thought of everything he might want to do at this point and narrowed it down to 3 options. The first being to target Duncan as he did in the show. Doing this would strengthen his alliance with Heather a bit, though not as much as the canon version, as Heather would want Courtney gone first. At this point, Al knows that, but might deem Duncan somewhat untrustworthy given their recent rivalry. Plus, given Duncan's history of just giving up and quitting in the show now, it's kind of not exactly looking like he's the most reliable guy. Whereas he stated that he can control Courtney, and she works as a distraction to Heather. The second option is to go after Courtney. She has showcased some incredible strength and strategy, and it's helped her quite a lot. Remember that she made it to the finale last season, and in Island she led the Killer Bass for a while. She is just as big, if not more, of a threat than Duncan, if she decides to flip. Plus, getting rid of her is what Heather wants, which will essentially replace Courtney as an ally 1-to-1, but Heather is a lot weaker than Courtney is in terms of the game. So you could definitely see why this might be a good option. The third option is to use his alliance of 3 to take down Heather. Right now, Court is getting caught up to Zeke, and Duncan and Al should be able to get a lead over Heather. This means any of them should be able to get immunity, opening Heather up as an easy outing as he'd have 3 votes for her. So at worst, it'd be a tie, but Cody always votes for Sierra. This is also easier because unlike the other 2 scenarios, Alejandro doesn't have to convince anyone to vote with him outside of his alliance. If he shoots for Duncan or Court, he'd have to get the other person on board to vote off one of their own, which would look weird. Now I'm sure you're thinking,
geez, Lytro, these all sound so plausible. How could you possibly decide?
And to that, I say it becomes easier once we analyze Al's original decision in canon. He had separate alliances with both Duncan and Heather, but both were waning. I already touched on how Duncan was building a rivalry, and that's not to mention he was known for being a major player in previous seasons. As for Heather, with Courtney gone, Al had no leverage against her aside from Duncan. But if Alejandro hadn't decided to team up with Heather to guarantee Duncan would get caught by Zeke, it means that Duncan would have had a real shot at immunity. This would have left only Heather and Al himself as the main targets, leaving the votes 2 in the air for his liking. He wouldn't have Heather as a major ally, and Duncan's trust was already waning, as I said. However, by doing the plan, he gained Heather's loyalty, gained immunity, got rid of a major threat, and was able to set up for the next phase by getting Cody into first class with him. So he kind of did like everything perfectly. Now in this scenario, Alejandro has less reasons to get rid of Duncan. He's not as big of a player in previous seasons due to his low ranking, and Al still has Courtney to rely on as an ally, meaning he doesn't need to gain Heather's trust. Duncan is shady, yes, but that's why Alejandro has Courtney as an ally, making it easier to get rid of Duncan soon. Speaking of, why doesn't Al just choose to eliminate Courtney? Well, why would he? He has no reason to whittle down his alliance, and even if he did, he would not want to cut the person that's more loyal to him. We see in canon that he didn't even want Courtney gone, she just happened to get eliminated due to the surprise double elimination. So that leaves Heather as the final choice, which may shock some of you. I know it's believed that Al truly liked Heather and wanted to keep her around since he works with her a few times. But do you remember what I said earlier about how Al getting rid of Duncan by using Heather was only to his benefit? And what does Alejandro do right after? He takes Cody to first class, not Heather, in order to stack the votes against Heather. It seems pretty clear that Al wants Heather gone first, but ensured his own immunity by working with her to get rid of Duncan. Sorry about that super long explanation, but I really wanted to give my full reasoning on every possible point in order to avoid any confusion about my decision. I think this is the most realistic path for Al, but if you're not sold, maybe the execution of the plan will change your mind. So with Courtney ahead, Heather would be quick to chase down Zeke to close the gap. At the same time, Duncan and Alejandro continue their teamwork, and due to Al stealing Heather's trank balls, she has no way of taking Zeke down. The duo end up finding Courtney, who is on Ezekiel's trail. He starts attacking her, leaving Duncan and Alejandro an open shot, as long as they're willing to also hit Courtney. Alejandro feigns kindness, refusing to do so, as he knows Duncan will likely take the shot. He does, knocking Courtney and Ezekiel out in one go, which gives him immunity. This might seem like a loss on Al's part, especially after I went so in depth as to how immunity helped him, but remember that he's got 2 secure alliance partners now, and Duncan hitting Courtney with a trank ball, costing her immunity, isn't exactly going to blow over too well. Once she finds out who hit her, she's going to be pissed. And Al didn't do it, it was Duncan. But for now, the 3 unite their votes against Heather, as that was likely the plan already, and Heather is the most obvious target. Now, it's possible Duncan flips on Alejandro here, but remember that Al pretty much just gave him immunity. Even if he did though, Sierra likely voted for Heather canonically, as there was only 1 vote for Al and Heather. But Alejandro had immunity, and the only one who wouldn't know that would be Duncan, who was asleep. Plus, with Sierra previously displaying worry that Heather might be attracted to Cody, and seeing how the animals fell for him in this episode, she was likely on high alert for threats to steal him. So we'd still have 3 votes against Heather if he decided to flip on Al. Duncan now has to choose who to bring with him to first class, which would likely be a strategic decision. With him not trusting Alejandro, he'd probably take Courtney. Sure, she is mad at him for shooting her, but he wanted to smooth things over with her in canon after literally cheating on her, so I think he'd be willing to make an attempt at getting things calmed. He tries to warn her about Alejandro, but she just kinda laughs it off, saying that he's treated her right so far. Plus, he's the reason Duncan made it through that challenge. I don't believe Duncan would be able to convince Courtney to turn on Al, making him even more ostracized. Alejandro likely begins the episode with a confessional on how he'll miss Heather, but how he hopes she'll call him after he wins. As for the challenge, there are a few alterations to the elimination order. For instance, Cody would be behind since Duncan has not been eliminated, meaning he can't get an egg from kicking the statue of Duncan. Plus, he doesn't have a basket this time either. Luckily, Sierra does weave Cody a bag like she did for Heather. I think Al would be ahead like he was in the show, with the pairs of Duncan and Courtney, and Cody and Sierra following shortly behind. Alejandro begins questioning his allies about their time in first class, hoping they haven't fully made peace yet. And he is correct, as Courtney does hint towards Duncan's mutiny. Alejandro's joy is cut short as he gets trampled by a boulder, forcing him and Courtney to run back, as they have both lost a few eggs. Luckily, Duncan goes barely unscathed, as he was the caboose for the 3. Cody the second would be born, but this time he'd just follow Cody himself, believing he's his mother. This is because Cody is with Sierra, so he'd be the first one to be seen by Cody Jr. With Cody and Sierra being distracted by the bird, Al and Courtney are able to catch up and pass them. However, Duncan has already made it out, giving him the mask in the next challenge. The order is now Duncan, Alejandro, Courtney, Sierra, and Cody. Duncan was out first, as I said. Al beat his partner Cody, so we'd probably beat Courtney here. And Sierra went before Heather, so she'd probably go before Cody, who is her partner now. The Condor song would be a little weird now, given the order and character swaps, but oh well. Because Cody Jr. was pretty much the reason Heather won the challenge, in canon, I'm going to have to give the win to Cody, as I don't think Duncan, Alejandro, or Sierra would be able to pull it off without Cody Jr. Alejandro originally voted for Sierra, but with the momentum built upon Duncan and how he had a decent shot at winning the challenge, Al knows he is a big threat that he can't wait on anymore. He checks with Courtney, asking who she wants to vote for, and she brings up what Duncan said to her about turning on Al before. This is exactly what Alejandro wanted, and by asking Courtney, he now makes her feel like she has the choice when really he just walked her to voting off Duncan with him. Cody votes for Sierra, leaving Sierra as the only questionable vote. She doesn't particularly like Duncan, but Alejandro isn't really on her radar. Plus, there's also the chance she votes for Courtney, as they've had some conflict before. So it's a 33% chance she ties the votes by choosing Alejandro, in which case I think Al has the tiebreaker in the bag. The one exception to that would be strength, as we've seen Duncan literally knock Alejandro's tooth out in one shot before, so that would be the one chance, but that's like a percentage chance already within a 33% chance. So I'm gonna have to say that Duncan is voted off here, and while Chris did ignore the votes in canon, we have an extra person in this scenario, so I will say that he lets the votes go through and Duncan is voted off. From there, Cody has to choose a first class partner, which would be between Courtney and Alejandro. He's seen that Courtney doesn't respect him or like him, so I think Al would be his choice, as he doesn't really know the guy. Luckily, this is perfect for Alejandro, as it now means he can get Cody on his side to eliminate Sierra. After all, he can turn against Courtney with the small help of Cody and destroy him in the finale. It was Cody who invited Al to first class, so it's not the same as it was canonically, but Cody would still be grateful Al kept Sierra out of first class still. At the same time, Alejandro would still fake the photos, putting Cody into the economy class cuddling with Courtney. This may seem a little bit unnecessary, but doing this puts Courtney and Sierra at odds, meaning as long as anyone else gains immunity, Sierra will vote for Courtney and not him. For the dinosaur sculpting, Court would be interesting, as I imagine she has some serious artistic capabilities and decent knowledge, so she could probably make a solid dinosaur. Cody would still vote for Sierra Dinosaur, and Sierra would vote for Cody's, since she said that was her second pick canonically and Heather is not here. I think Courtney would like the effort Alejandro put into building a perfect replica of a real dinosaur, so she'd pick him. As for Alejandro, he'd be torn between Sierra and Courtney's. He appreciates Courtney's ingenuity, but I think he'd lean more towards Sierra's genuine emotion. This would shock Court, putting her in last. Al and Cody have one vote, so Cody would get the pick while Alejandro gets the kids set. Originally, Cody got no votes and still got third, which leads me to believe that Al's uncreative thinking is what placed him last. That's why I gave him the kids set, even though he technically tied with Cody. Luckily for Al, I think Cody would be willing to give up the pickaxe, as lugging it around would be tough, and Sierra is probably going to dig for both of them anyway, or let her use her prize. Alejandro thanks Cody and gets to work. This leaves Courtney with her hands before getting wedged in a hole like Heather, as she's essentially in the same spot. But she would not have a barrel, as Heather only found it after throwing her pick, which Courtney doesn't have, so she would never do. Al hears Courtney yelling for help, but knows that she can't see him, so he could just go on without her and feign ignorance. And given he found a barrel, that's what he's gonna do. He arrives only to find Sierra's barrel already there. Upon this sight, Al goes back to Courtney, getting her out of the hole with a much different song this time. He then helps her dig with his pickaxe, easily finding the barrel Heather found originally and bringing it back. With Sierra's immunity, it's looking like Al's gonna have to switch into voting against Cody. Sure, Courtney is the bigger threat, but a 2v1 final 3 is not what he wants. Court is on board, but Sierra quickly finds her, revealing that Alejandro made a fake photo of her and Cody cuddling. This completely flips Courtney's view of Alejandro, as she realizes how he easily found her even after she stopped yelling for help. He would only have known that if he heard her yelling before he took his barrel. And so the votes are stacked against Al, but luckily for him, Sierra accidentally blows up the plane, causing her to be automatically eliminated. This brings us to the final Aftermath episode, where we'd have a few different characters picking who they support. Heather is likely going for Al, as she doesn't like him after he voted her off, but she doesn't respect Cody at all, and Courtney seems pathetic how long she fell for him. And yeah, Heather's still pretty salty about that. Is anyone picking Courtney? Maybe Gwen, since they're friends? Duncan was on Team Cody originally, but he dislikes both Cody and Courtney, so like Gwen, it's up in the air. He'd probably toss the court flag to Blanley though, since she has been kind of a Heather-like figure based on her performance in action. Owen and Blanley compete for Team Courtney, Harold for Team Cody, and for Team Al, probably Tyler. Blanley likely selects the Jaguar or Doberman for Courtney, and Tyler chooses the Lion or Moose for Al. The Lion is obviously based on how he sees Al as a strong leader, and the Moose is because, in typical Tyler fashion, he'd probably choose one that is strong in his head, but is obviously a pretty goofy choice to anybody else. I think Tyler could clutch the win for Alejandro, giving him first prize, and Cody second. Back to our main cast, I do think Courtney would show some worry about Sierra buried under the wreckage. Cody gets her out, and Chris announces the race to Hawaii. Courtney expresses her anger at Al for manipulating her, saying that he'd better be prepared to go down. She makes it onto the train, pretty much taking Heather's place yet again. Everything goes about the same, just with Alejandro being less flirty with Courtney as he doesn't truly like her. The song for this episode can go similarly too, with some minor changes again. I don't think Al would be tricked by Courtney the way he was with Heather, so he'd probably just drop her off the train, leading her to the horses. Since he's on the train, he would keep Ezekiel at bay. Courtney gains the lead, leaving Alejandro behind, as the horses are somehow faster than the train when you actually look at the diagram shown in the show. I don't see how Al would catch up from there, as he'd only find out she's ahead after, well, she gets ahead, meaning he can't jump on a horse. So this gives Cody and Courtney a huge head start on the boat race. Since Courtney wouldn't be slowed down by Al bumping her boat like Heather was, she'd be in the lead. However, she runs out of gas, allowing Cody to start catching up. Alejandro arrives on the boat, going as fast as he can, but he's just too far behind at this point. So our two finalists are Cody and Courtney, meaning we can skip the first part of the finale. Courtney and Cody both receive helpers for the final challenge. Harold would be an obvious pick for Cody, with him begging Gwen to help him too, but she's awkward about it due to Duncan. So to help Gwen out, and since Harold is going, Lashana decides to go for it instead. Plus, in this version of action, Courtney was the reason Lashana and Harold had issues, so this would be payback. As for Courtney, she'd probably want some strong players. Alejandro is the most obvious pick, but the second one could be anyone. Gwen is her friend, but she wouldn't want to go against Cody. Duncan is a possible pick, as he doesn't really like either of them. The only issue is that both Duncan and Al would likely ask for a cut, but Courtney has no real options otherwise. The only ones I could think of would be Izzy or Heather, the latter of the which would likely also ask for a cut. Since Al is on her team and had first prize, Courtney receives his wheelbarrow, putting her ahead of Cody by a decent margin. With Cody and Courtney's teams being rivals no matter how you slice it, there would be a lot of tension. Court's team seems stronger, but they'd also be prodding her to make sure that she's willing to pay up if they help her win. If not, they'll just throw it. She refuses, and Cody's team is able to trap her for a bit, giving him the lead. Courtney finally gives in, agreeing to give them a cut of the money, which makes her team lock in and help her catch up. In Court's ending, she ends up meeting Cody and knocks him aside, but she is strained, so she goes down too. Luckily, she gets up before he does, throwing her sacrifice into the lava, but Ezekiel steals the $1 million as her allies ask for their cut. In Cody's ending, I'd imagine he swaps their dummies while she's down, and Courtney accidentally throws the wrong one into the volcano. Pretty much a similar result to the canon alternate Alejandro ending. And with that, we have Courtney potentially winning or getting second place twice in a row, which is pretty unique. We also have Cody getting a very deserved W, as in canon he only got third place. Alejandro is defeated by both people who he tried to manipulate, and it's possible that he still gets put into the robot suit because he might still get hit by the lava because he was on Courtney's team, so he'd actively be a part of the challenge. Plus, nobody likes him, so them all running him over as well is still very possible. But with that, we can end What If Duncan Was Eliminated in Dodgebrawl Part 3, and next time we'll be covering All-Stars, because Revenge of the Island won't really change. I hope you guys have enjoyed the parts so far, and if you have, please consider becoming a channel member for only $2.99 a month. You get access to awesome perks like early videos, priority comment replies, and exclusive posts, so make sure you do that if you can. But as always, tell me if you like this part, tell me what you think will happen next, comment your requests for future videos, and subscribe. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.